Steve McQueen was the most magnetic movie star of his generation. Ali MacGraw was the most sought-after actress in Hollywood. When they fell in love on a film set in 1972, the world treated it like the inevitable collision of two perfect things. But what the world never saw was what happened once the cameras stopped rolling. What Ali has shared, in her memoir, in interviews, and in reflection she still offers now at 87, describes something the fairy tale version of their story was never designed to contain. The cost of loving Steve McQueen was her career, her sense of self, and very nearly everything else. But before we get into what the marriage actually looked like from the inside, there is one fact you need to understand first. Because without it, nothing that follows makes sense. When they married in July of 1973, McQueen was the highest-paid actor in the world. He had built that position through genuine talent and an iron insistence on his own terms, and those terms extended into his personal life in ways that were not negotiable. He did not want a wife who worked. More specifically, he did not want a wife whose public profile could compete with or complicate his own. Ali MacGraw, at the moment she agreed to this, was not a minor actress making a convenient concession. She had just come off Love Story, a film that had earned over $100 million worldwide and transformed her from a promising newcomer into one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema. She had an Academy Award nomination. Producers were pursuing her. She was, in every measurable sense, at the exact moment when careers either solidify into something lasting or begin to fall apart for want of momentum. She chose McQueen over the momentum. And here is where it gets complicated. She has been honest about why. By her own account, she was somewhat terrified of him, in the specific way that intensely charismatic and emotionally unpredictable people tend to unsettle those who love them. She feared losing him more than she feared losing her career. That calculus makes complete sense emotionally. In retrospect, it makes almost none. So she signed the prenuptial agreement he presented. She stepped away from Hollywood. She moved into the beach house in Malibu and learned, in her own words, to play the role of a simple woman to the absolute hilt. She cooked. She cleaned. She managed the household and raised her son Joshua from her previous marriage to Robert Evans. She became, in other words, a supporting character in someone else's story at the precise moment her own story was most interesting. And that detail about Robert Evans matters more than it might seem. Evans was the head of production at Paramount Pictures. He had cast her in Love Story. He had been her husband, her collaborator, and in many ways the architect of the career she then walked away from. Their marriage ended when she began her affair with McQueen during the filming of The Getaway in 1972, a film Evans himself had arranged for her to appear in. She left everything for McQueen, and then McQueen required her to leave everything again, in a different and more permanent way. She did not work again in any significant capacity for several years. The roles she might have taken went to other women. The momentum she had built dissipated in exactly the way it would have if she had simply stopped showing up, which is essentially what happened. And McQueen, it turned out, was considerably more complicated to show up for than any film set she had ever worked on. Steve McQueen's jealousy was not an occasional feature of his personality. It was a constant environmental condition of the marriage, present regardless of whether Ali had done anything to invite it, and operating according to a logic that had more to do with his own psychological history than with anything she actually did. His childhood had been genuinely difficult. His father abandoned the family before McQueen was old enough to remember him. His mother sent him away at various points to live with relatives, and eventually to a reform school that was not a gentle environment for a sensitive child. He emerged from all of that with a foundational distrust of people, particularly women, that he was never fully able to work through, no matter how much success or adoration came his way. Ali has described his jealousy as flaring up at almost nothing, a look in a direction he hadn't approved, a conversation that lasted longer than he thought it should, ordinary social interactions that, filtered through his particular anxiety, looked like evidence of betrayal. She learned to manage her behavior in public and private to avoid triggering it. That is the kind of adaptive self-censorship that people in controlling relationships develop so gradually they barely notice it, until they look back from a distance and realize how much of themselves they had quietly given away. But here is the part that makes it worse. While Ali was reshaping her entire behavior to prevent any appearance of interest in other men, McQueen was widely understood within Hollywood to be conducting himself without similar restraint. His infidelities were not a secret. People knew. Ali knew, or suspected. And the combination of knowing, being expected to accept it, while simultaneously being held accountable for infractions that didn't come close to that standard. That was a specific kind of humiliation she has described with considerable directness in the years since. His substance use added another layer of unpredictability. He drank heavily and used drugs in ways that made the emotional temperature of the household impossible to predict. Ali developed her own serious problem with alcohol during these years, and she has been clear about the connection. She wasn't looking for relief from an abstract stress. She was looking for relief from a specific person in a specific household. And the thing she reached for turned out to be as dangerous as what she was reaching away from. The marriage the public saw, glimpsed in paparazzi photographs, beautiful people on the California coast, looked like exactly what everyone expected. The marriage Ali lived was something else entirely. And she has spent the better part of 40 years finding the language to describe the distance between those two things. Then came the moment that changed everything. And it wasn't a dramatic confrontation. By 1977, Ali had been out of professional circulation for approximately 4 years. The career she had walked away from at its peak had not frozen in place waiting for her return. Hollywood does not work that way. But the desire to work, to return to the thing that had given her a sense of identity before McQueen had reorganized everything around his own, had not gone away. It had only been suppressed. And by 1977, it was no longer suppressible. When she told him she wanted to go back to work, his response was immediate and definitive. If that was her decision, they would be filing for divorce.
No negotiation.
No discussion. He had established the terms of the marriage before it began, and he regarded her announcement as a violation of those terms. His position was at least consistent with who he had always been. The problem was that she had changed, and there was no version of what he was offering that had room for who she was becoming. She accepted a role in Convoy, directed by Sam Peckinpah, the same director who had made The Getaway, the film where she and McQueen had first fallen in love. The symbolic weight of that choice is difficult to ignore. Returning to work through the same director who had set the whole story in motion. The divorce was finalized in 1978. She was 39 years old. She had given the middle years of her career to a marriage that ended because she decided she was entitled to have one. McQueen remarried within the year, a woman named Barbara Minty, who was 23 at the time. That detail is its own comment on the specific form his need for control took. 2 years later, in November of 1980, Steve McQueen died from cancer caused by asbestos exposure. He was 50 years old. Ali has described the grief that followed as complicated in a way that simple grief is not. She had loved him. She had also spent years being managed, controlled, and diminished by him. Those two facts existed simultaneously. The grief she felt was tangled up with everything the marriage had actually been, not just the parts that looked good in photographs. She has said she wished they had both found sobriety earlier. That is the most compressed possible description of everything that went wrong between them. Now, her alcoholism is not a sidebar to the story of her marriage. It is directly connected to it. And she has been honest about that in ways that required her to hold two uncomfortable truths at once, that she made her own choices, and that the environment she was living in shaped what choices were available to her. She had grown up in a household where alcoholism was already present. Her father's drinking was a feature of her childhood, and the instability it created contributed to the low self-confidence and hunger for external validation that she has identified as running threads through her early adult life. She arrived at her relationship with McQueen with those vulnerabilities already in place. What the marriage did was create conditions where reaching for alcohol made a particular kind of sense. The isolation made it worse. She had given up work, which meant she had given up the social world that professional life provides. She was in Malibu, in a beautiful beach house that was somewhat removed from ordinary life, managing a household and a child and a husband whose moods could shift in ways that were impossible to anticipate or control. Alcohol reduced the edge of all that. It made the evenings more manageable. And then it became something she needed rather than something she chose. After McQueen's death, she kept working. A 14-episode arc on Dynasty in 1984 brought her back to significant public visibility, but the architecture of what her career might have been had she not stepped away during its most important years was gone. She was building something smaller in the space where something larger might have existed. The decision to enter treatment at the Betty Ford Center came in the early 90s, and she has described it as a genuine turning point. The recovery process required her to examine not just the drinking, but everything the drinking had been covering: the marriages, the career surrendered and then partially lost, the years of self-suppression, the grief that had accumulated and never been fully processed. She has been sober for more than 30 years. That number is not incidental. In 1994, Ali MacGraw left Hollywood and moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The decision was not driven by failure. It was driven by a recognition that the life she wanted to live was not compatible with the life Los Angeles required of her, and that she had spent enough years living according to other people's requirements. Santa Fe gave her something she had not had in any consistent way across the preceding decades: ordinary days with no particular demand on them. She gardened. She practiced yoga and meditation as serious commitments. She surrounded herself with animals. She developed a painting practice. She found that the things she had set aside in favor of career and relationships and the maintenance of a public persona were the things that actually sustained her, and that the public persona had been costing her energy she could have spent on the sustaining things all along. She did not remarry. She has spoken about choosing herself after decades of organizing her life around other people, and about how that choice requires a kind of sustained daily practice rather than a single dramatic decision. It is not a resolution with fanfare. It is an ordinary discipline, pursued quietly in a small city in New Mexico, far from the context that made her famous. In 2016, she appeared on stage with Ryan O'Neal in a touring production of Love Letters, reuniting the two actors whose names have been linked since Love Story more than 4 decades earlier. She has spoken about O'Neal with warmth and without the complicated emotional